Before I begin the analysis, I need to get over two things that are very important to this discussion. Firstly, this game has quite a large and game-changing twist about halfway through, which I would call rather important for my reading. You'll have about a 7-minute grace period with no spoilers at the beginning to conclude whether it's for you if you can and want to play, but after that, the gloves are off. Secondly, and somewhat linked to that, more than any other video on my channel, this is a recommendation/review. I want people near my headspace to find this game because I think it's really good. It's editing, Max. I don't know how I didn't notice this at the time, but there's also going to be some pretty minor spoilers for Celeste a bit later down the line. Okay, on with the video. Linelith, that's the game I've been referring to, is an indie grid-based puzzler made by Patrick Traynor of Patrick's Parabox fame. I haven't played it, which is why the footage here is from the trailer, but it's very well reviewed and has an amazing concept. Linelith was released only 2 months later. You can get it on these game sites. It's £2.50 at base price and about as easy as these games. It's also not a huge time investment. I beat it in less than an hour, but only because I'm especially cool. It would probably take you a couple of sittings. Ew, look at you. Ew, disgusting. Stop. Look away. Only cool people get to watch my videos. The actual mechanics of each puzzle are shockingly simple. My jaw was shocked when I first played this game at just how simple these puzzles all are. Ignore all of this for a second, we'll get back to that. But the actual mechanics of these puzzles are that you need to drag a continuous line from one closed off tile on this grid to any other. This line can't overlap, and there are these dots which represent how many of the surrounding 4 tiles your line has to go over, but that's really it for now. Players may have some confusion on where they can and can't start and stop, and I've seen lots of people get stuck on the idea that you need to fill in all of the tiles, but the game does its best to wordlessly teach and destigmatise this to you, and you're also watching this video, so if you don't mind me spoiling just one puzzle, then allow me to analyse why this is such a good mechanic. If you do mind, then play the game already. This puzzle, near the halfway mark in my playthrough, is deceptively complex. There's this relatively simple shape and only 2 runes. I'm going to call them runes from now on. If you approach through the 3, you'll quickly find that this channel becomes impossible, but going down here first will also be impossible because going on the top or bottom path both forces you to flip to the other side, and because you have to go on both, that means you'll swap twice in total, but you need to end on the opposite side, which would mean you need to swap an odd number of times. The solution is to do this, and then it says in brackets, solution. That's not the only one. Practically every puzzle in this game is teaching you something new or forcing you to act in some new way. There are a few more mechanics too, once you really get into the flow of things. There's the twist, which introduces one new idea to the gameplay, but there's also some puzzles that take place on this grey coal-like substance. There are 2 things that you might notice here. For one, the rocks share a design with you. The corners are filled in, but other than that, they're a direct copy-paste. And also, this puzzle is provably impossible. Very easily, in fact, in that it only has one available entrance. And sure enough, if you plug your silly little fella into this end, you've made it doable. This idea circles back to that thing I mentioned of all of the stuff outside of the puzzle. A lot of this isn't really necessary to the game, it's just some abstract ice platform in the middle of space that doesn't really serve any gameplay or narrative purpose and makes the It's just some abstract ice platform in the middle of space that doesn't really serve any gameplay or narrative purpose and makes the aesthetic conflated at best. But that's why I love it. These boxes and these glyphs, I've changed my mind, I'm going to call them glyphs from now on, the walls and the space all seem mismatched. This very game is kind of happenstantial and defiantly refuses to explain itself. The way I described this in the first iteration of the script was, it indiscriminately looms over the player to produce a greater and yet vaguer and more conceptual aesthetic, which the game lets you briefly explore and conquer. But in the end, the overall solution of this game is brevity and finding solutions. For a game that makes you reflect so much on the nature of solving puzzles, it kind of starves you of that overall experience. I never really understood what people meant when they say it's better for art to leave you wanting more than to leave you feel bloated. Personally, I don't like either, probably an equal amount, and I still don't really. But here it feels so potent and purposeful. Once again, you feel like you're having a conversation with some far greater power, and the means it uses to communicate seem either insignificant or completely incoherent to you. There are a lot of other aspects to this dynamic. There's the twist, but there's also the music and sound design, which feels really clean and vivid. I like it when art feels vivid. They actually help to accent the process of solving puzzles. After a while, the music fades away into the background and you're asked to form your own melody as a byproduct of these chirps from twisting your line. It's a game about the process of solving puzzles, but it also holds this paraboxical aesthetic of letting you solve it, but having that produce a great aesthetic. In many ways, it's just as engaging to analyse this game as it is to play, exploring the infinite depths of this profound experience in a realm where there are no coding limitations. Now, for all of that stuff about the transaction of knowledge and aesthetic of insignificance to work, the game would need to be fundamentally easy. I don't want to say it's the easiest game ever, you could very well get stuck on it. And I also don't think that difficulty is an indicator of quality in any sense. This interpretation sort of relies on your dynamic to the game's difficulty being controlled. There are a few ways games can do this, I've linked a few videos on it, but in the case of Linelith they would all feel over-designed. Of course there's the twist, but in a more broad sense this game is entirely dedicated to indulging the player through their gameplay. Let's peel back a few layers and analyse this more metatextually. This is effectively putting the game's difficulty into its own conversation, as both a way to ensure the flow and puzzle solving curve, but also in its theming. It takes up the same space as the music or setting, but I find this a lot more interesting than either of those. For one, it's something that you more actively experience, you're forced to confront it and question it when you're playing a puzzle game, or really any game for that matter. It also feels more fundamental to the game. I could play a version that's completely silent and the texture's just placeholders, or probably worse, in a more narrative driven and weighty background, but this conversation would still probably carry through, and it's sort of fundamental to what I love about this aesthetic, because this game is fundamentally about solving puzzles. A lot of puzzle games are, though in different interpretations of it. Coming to terms with this system and understanding different motifs and what it's asking you to do at any given moment. This is true of most puzzle games, but when given no other context as a stimulus, this game becomes fundamentally about that. Making games, especially difficult ones, is kind of weird. Designing any inherent and necessary difficulty is kind of saying that you're complacent in elements of this game being inaccessible to people just because they lack the skills to perform it, but oftentimes removing that difficulty would rob players of an inherent satisfaction, awareness and aesthetic that comes from it. In a broader sense, this is true of all art. Things like language differences, disabilities and anything that would make it difficult to understand narratives would mean it's impossible for everyone to truly experience a work of art in full, if that's what you'd want to do. This isn't a value judgment, literally all art does this, including me, but Linelith makes a point of this. Before I talk about how, I want to talk about really the only other game I can think of using difficulty in such a conversation. Celeste is a very good game. It has some of the most polished and carefully designed platforming and platforming controls of all time. Its narrative and theming is all engagingly told and beautiful. Plus, as a gender-fluid shitposter, I'm contractually obligated to mention it and say that it's good. Celeste tackles this problem head-on. Though more literal and narratively driven, it too works difficulty into its main storyline and conversation, and has a notoriously forgiving assist mode. This is very good. It probably fits Celeste better than it would some other games, but this assist mode feels like a core assertion of the game's thesis. This game is about climbing mountains and overcoming obstacles, and at every point along that journey Madeline is asked to step down, to give up climbing this mountain and return to her safe life. But the canon choice Madeline makes is to persevere, to remain determined in climbing to the summit. Similarly, the player might feel tempted to turn on assist mode, but that would be going against the laid out story, which is what most people playing the game are trying to achieve. But the story is also dedicated to developing Madeline, and showing her accept help as a necessary way of reaching the summit. These are the two sides of Celeste's theme of difficulty, both as a necessary experience and as a human experience. However, I will say I think Linelith is better in this regard. Celeste can simultaneously feel too over-designed and easy, and for my friend who I know is watching this and can't beat Chapter 1 with all of the assist mode features, too difficult. But when you replace this with this, you can start getting somewhere. This is your last chance to play Linelith. Okay, assuming you've played it, you might be thinking, that was the twist? Honestly, the game doesn't put much weight on it, you just eventually discover it through background details. As you keep going through this world, there are multiple moments where you might have an idea. When the rocks are introduced, when it's revealed you can draw on yourself, when the symbols, glyphs sounded too fancy so I'm calling them symbols, appear along the outside of a puzzle, shapes that look suspiciously line-like, any misclick throughout the game, or in my case right here, that reveal this twist that you can just draw on any surface, even the void. I would argue it really couldn't have been given much more weight. It plays into this dynamic of forcing you to solve for the theming behind it, so I'll do it for you. This is where the game first revealed itself to me, where I first realised the greater themes that had been at play this entire time, and how it was almost forcing my hand to analyse it. For one, there's few metaphors for mastering a world as good as literally gaining the knowledge to draw over it, but the game is gradually displaying this integral bit of knowledge to you and passing this world over to you. It also transcends any level of puzzle solving ability. It abstracts the conversation from the game to something else. From now on, the game feels much more defined, but also the possibilities for what it can be feel much more loose. Your new objective for a while will be to go back and solve all of the areas you previously treated as set dressing, which sort of forces a notion of progression and contemplation. It asks you to reflect on what this has all meant and how it could so easily be transformed. It really brings to light the dynamic. The subconscious nature of the art desperately wants to be understood. There's this binding emotional experience of stagnated progression. It's all oddly quiet and introspective because the process is the art. Back to Celeste, I really do like it. Keep in mind, it's aiming for an entirely different aesthetic and doing it well, but it's such a smooth experience, there's little metatextual friction in the process. In Linelith, none of the design feels like it has you in mind. There are these rocks in this one section and a lot later on. They're missing the corners just like your player character, and you can move them around and join parts of them to other rock puzzles, but the way you move these rocks is by using the grid-based system to push and pull them. Somewhat arbitrary, maybe even necessary, like many of the things we've analysed have been, but it feels like an empty gesture to a convention. It's a language you learn, but it all feels stiff and arbitrary. But it still comes together to influence and enrich the aesthetic. Okay, let's finally drag this into something resembling a conclusion. I haven't seen much of Patrick's other games, but from what I have, I can imagine someone saying, well, what makes this game special? A lot of what I've been talking about is just an ambiguous aesthetic, which is admittedly my bad script writing. If I did have to posit something though, I would say this game is poignantly simple. It presents you with a world to explore scattered with mostly insignificant obstacles, and along the way with the puzzle solving process so simple and empty-headed, it fades into the background and forces you to ask other questions. As you do, the game reveals more of itself to you. This is effectively a macrocosm of solving puzzles, achieving fulfillment, an understanding of your relation with this art that you're given the task of solving. The final puzzle of Linelith is to solve the entire void that surrounds your ice platform. The game's already taught and let you solve small areas of void, so you may have been able to guess this, though it wasn't implicitly told.
That way. Can I solve the void? Oh my god, I can solve the void!
The ideographs, that's what I'm going to be calling them for the last 50 seconds, are floating in the middle of space. You can't even tell what tiles they lie on. It's undefined broad, and as there's such a build-up for you approaching it, it feels even a little ominous and imposing. But also, this probably won't be your final puzzle. You'll still be left wandering around for one or two puzzles you missed, like you accidentally figuring out the twist and wandering back to solve all of the previous puzzles. I think that's kind of the point, or at least necessary. As you solve the void, you're given one of 3 achievements in the game. Solve the outside. The other 2 aren't that important. I think this is a bookend to the game, moving on from this world to solving others or alternately forcing introspection, but when you're left to wander around the world at the end, you're still in the conversation of the art, and breaking that is sort of coincidental and then the end feels empty. You're still in this world and you're the one who has to go away. I don't want to imply any intent, but this game really couldn't have ended satisfyingly. A satisfying ending doesn't really represent the aesthetic. It represents transcending it and having a position of greater importance that would, ironically, undermine it. Okay, so I have a few more thoughts on this, but I'm at 420 words, and I'll probably save those for a review of Patrick's Parabox when I get around to playing it. Bye!